Tottenham coach Ange Postecoglou is currently dividing opinion amongst Spurs fans. After their 4-0 loss to Newcastle, some fans are saying this is already not going to improve, whereas others are emphasising that it's still early in Postecoglou's tenure. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And to do that, I'm joined by Jon Mackenzie and JJ Bull. Okay, let's begin with you, Jon. It's worth saying at the outset, Tottenham have a horror set of final fixtures in the Premier League. But up to this point, how would you categorise their season so far? Is Postecoglou doing a good job?
Yeah, I think it's easy to sort of get lost in the recent form because they have dropped a few points against teams that you might expect them to win against. But I think if you take a big picture view and you look at the way that they've performed over the 32 games in the Premier League that Ange Postecoglou's been there, actually a slightly different picture emerges, because if you look at the points per game for those 32 matches, and compare them against the last 5 Spurs managers over the same time period, which we can do apart from with Nuno Espirito Santo because he was only there for 10 games. But if we look at the points per game for all of those managers, we'll see that Postecoglou is actually second on that list. He's just behind Antonio Conte. And I think that's kind of interesting because Antonio Conte starts out really well and then starts to decline, isn't able to keep those performances up. Whereas maybe the more well-known good Spurs coach was Mauricio Pochettino, who started off a little bit lower and then actually got Spurs up to the level where they were starting to compete in the Champions League. So I guess the big question is whether or not he's going to follow that decline of Conte over time, or whether or not he's going to have that upward trajectory that Pochettino had.
Well, I mean, there's some evidence already to suggest that Tottenham have been declining in the second half of the season under Postecoglou. Doesn't that make him a bit more of a Conte? Yeah,
I think it's interesting to make that kind of comparison because I see Postecoglou and Conte as both very idealistic coaches. Now, what I mean by that is that, you know, they have ideas and they live and die by those ideas.
To be clear, very different stylistically, not the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So,
but they always want to play their football.
Yeah, exactly. So they're like, this is the way we're going to play, and it doesn't matter so much what other teams are going to do. We are going to play this play style. Rather than, I guess the opposite would be pragmatist coaches who are like, we're always just going to respond to whatever the opposition are doing. I don't know if you saw, but there were some pretty interesting quotes in the German media from Eric Dyer, and he was talking about the difference between the training approaches of Postecoglou and Conte, and they are very different, as JJ mentioned before. This is the quote about Postecoglou. Dyer saying that he really doesn't do any tactical work in training, which I think, you know, obviously sounds bad for a coach to not do any tactical.
He also then says that what he does is that he doesn't do any tactical work apart from every single training drill from Monday to Friday.
Yeah, it's some tactical work. Whereas when he's talking about Conte, what he's saying with Conte is that they're doing these sessions regularly where they'll do 10 versus 0 walkthroughs. You line up the team on the weekend that are going to play on the pitch and you say, right, we're going to try and do these patterns. That
like
this is
mannequins
how we're going to,
as well.
Yeah,
so you
exactly.
Get a little
this is how the opposition are going to be standing. Here's the gaps you can find to attack them. Obviously, Dyer's saying here, they were so well drilled in you, these sort of patterns, that they would be ingrained within you.
But Postecoglou came back on this, didn't he?
Yeah, so there's a couple of quotes where Postecoglou was asked about what Dyer had said, and he said, I don't know what you mean by tactical work. He makes the point that JJ made. Everything we do is geared to how we're going to play football. So for me, by extension, is tactical work. If you're talking about do we do training where we're standing around and working on how we're going to stop an opponent, no, we don't do that, mate. Didn't say mate, I added that.
Didn't say you added
that
mate.
was facetious of me.
Yeah.
But I think what's really interesting here is that we would still describe Postecoglou as an idealistic coach. He still has an idea about how he wants his teams to play football, and the famous adage that everyone likes to throw around about Postecoglou is that quote he said where he was like, it's just how we play, mate.
Well, doesn't this make him more idealistic? Because he's literally saying we don't do any training about how the opposition are going to, we don't have to stop them, we're just about how we want to play.
So the idea with Postecoglou is like, this is the way we play, and we are not going to change anything based on the opposition. If we don't win games, it's because we're not expressing our ideas well enough.
Yeah.
Conte, I think, still has the ideas there, but they're super well drilled and rigid. Postecoglou has the same idea, but the way that he trains it is a little bit more, I guess he's doing these training drills that are supposed to almost trick the players into doing the right thing on the pitch. But it's still instilling that idea. It's just a different way of doing it. And I think the reason why this is so important, the reason why we're talking about idealistic coaches, is as soon as you have like a central idea, it becomes a lot easier, I think, for other coaches to try and stop them from performing that idea on the pitch. So I think it would be interesting for us to actually have a look at what Ange Postecoglou is doing in terms of his idea, and then think about ways that teams have started stopping those ideas from being enacted on the field.
Okay.
So the big thing about Postecoglou's approach is that he always talks about just wanting possession, wanting the ball, wanting to attack with the ball. So even when he's talking about out of possession stuff, he's saying the idea here is for us to win the ball back and then go and attack again. So what I think is best for us to do is just break down what Spurs are trying to do into two parts. The beginning, you've got build up, obviously. You're going to try and build out from the back and get the ball into the attacking third and then generate chances.
Can I say something directly to the audience?
You can.
Because I noticed a couple of comments last week saying that Joe's not paying attention. There's a screen here, and that's how I'm watching what Jon's doing. I figured I'd just clear that up. Yeah. I'm not listening to him. Now, I'd like to listen to you very closely, Jon. Please continue.
So the build-up unit, actually, what we know about Spurs is they love to invert their fullbacks, right? Everyone talks about inverting fullbacks. Fullbacks coming inside here alongside the pivot in build-up. Very narrow build-up setup here. And the idea is you've got players close together. You should be able to move the ball quickly through the opposition's press and get it forward into front three. What Spurs do that's quite different, actually, is they have a lot of flexibility in their build-up patterns. So yeah, we've got the fullbacks here in the second line of the build-up. But actually, what we'll often see with Spurs is these fullbacks actually ending up in the even as far as the front line, or maybe in the space between the two. And then you can have Maddison can drop in to help out. Sometimes you'll have Sarr. You can have any combination of these players. And the idea is that you have a load of flexibility here, so it's harder for teams to stop you from building up. They don't always invert their fullbacks like this tightly. Sometimes you'll have maybe a player out in the wide area if you're trying to create a bit more width. But the general principle is fullbacks come inside, they can maybe push up into the next line. And if you're doing this for the opposition, like, what do you do? This is a fullback usually here. Fullback's now up here. How do you mark them? So these sorts of questions are the ones that are posed to football teams that are playing against Spurs.
How do they mark you?
Who?
No. If you're the fullback, never mind. The audience know what I'm saying. Carry on.
And the idea here is to move the ball as quickly as possible. I think a lot of other teams, when they do this in build-up, they're just trying to essentially, get possession of the ball, settle possession, and then arrive at the final third in the way that they want to. Whereas with Postecoglou, I think tempo is really important. They want to get the ball forward as quickly as possible because they want to be attacking as much as possible. And this is great because it does allow you to move the ball down the field, but there are problems, one of which is when you have flexibility and you're trying to get as many players into that front line as possible to be as dangerous as possible, the fullbacks can jump into the final line. Often you'll see situations where Spurs end up looking like this.
It looks like one of my Football Manager teams, I would say.
Yeah, and that's not what you want happening. So here's an example of the game against Aston Villa, and we can see that here. Like, we've got two centre-backs, here's the pivot player. Now the two fullbacks are up in the front line here. We've got Porro up here and Udogie's over on this side. Basically, you ended up with actually what we would call this rest defence, right? These players are all attacking and the rest are defending like this. So you've got two centre-backs and a pivot. Villa have a lot of players in advance here, so if the ball is turned over, they could actually have a 5v3 against you. Yeah. So already, like, questions about maybe the defensive solidity of this, but also, like, you're getting upside from flexibility, but also you're losing a little bit of structure anyway. And the other thing that you get from this is that sometimes you end up with players in certain situations that you might not necessarily want there. So again, here's the structure as we've talked about it: two centre-backs and then two inverted fullbacks around a pivot player. But actually, these aren't inverted fullbacks. This is Son, who's the striker, who should be what you probably want closer towards your goal, and Sarr as well. Now again, that's flexibility. It pulls players around. It destroys the opposite team's marking, so it's good in terms of the in-possession stuff. But out of possession, if this ball is turned over, you now have a defence consisting of Son, right? So again, questions about the defensive solidity of this.
I mean, it's worth saying as well that this results in like a significantly lower goal difference than the teams who are currently tracking those top three positions, although not that dissimilar to Aston Villa.
Yes, but I guess the upside is supposed to be, well, we're actually generating a lot more goals than we would be normally. And that brings us to the other aspect of this idealism, which is how do we repeatedly create dangerous chances, right? So we have this front five, very similar to what you'd expect to see from elite positional play teams, because you're stretching the opposition. Because your fullbacks are inverted here, the idea then is your eights can push up into that front line to again just add more attacking threat. And as we've seen, these players can often push forward too. So you generate a huge amount of attacking upside because you have all of these players in the front line. You have these really nice triangles and in the wide areas, and the idea is to either play in behind or to hit the byline, and you then get this area of the pitch where they just generate a lot of big chances from. So we've talked a lot about how Richarlison's been great for them because he just operates in that kind of area and picks up on these chances. So
these are the kinds of repeatable drills that they do in training that aren't tactical.
Yeah.
Monday to Friday.
Yeah, exactly. So two areas then: build up, narrow, flexible, and then wide attacking. In the wide areas, 1v1 dribblers trying to hit byline and create these dangerous chances. So if you're going to try and cause them problems, you have to try and touch on both of those aspects of the idea, and if you can do that, then you'll cause Spurs problems.
I mean, that's interesting, and it makes them sound a little bit predictable. Is that how Newcastle hammered them.
Yeah, so what Eddie Howe did is he focused on both of those aspects that we talked about. Narrow build-up with flexibility and then the wide attacking. And he came up with a game plan that was actually quite brilliant in many respects. So let's say Spurs building up like this, as they do. There's your narrow build-up unit. What we had from Eddie Howe was he put his 2 wide forwards on the 2 centre-backs. He sat Isak between the pivot player and the goalkeeper, so he can sort of operate as a shuttle between the two. The interesting thing here was that the full-backs were then marked by his wing-backs, so Murphy and Anderson come up to cover Udogie and Porro, and then you can just go player for player on everyone else. So your 2 centre midfielders on the 2 Spurs centre midfielders, and then your wide centre backs on the wide
Look how wide
forwards.
the centre backs are.
Yeah.
That's
Pretty
very
wide.
wide.
Very
That
wide.
is very wide. I also like the idea of Johnson v Burn. That feels like a fun one.
Yeah, the trade-off here is, right, what you've got is essentially man for man, pretty much. You've got 2v1 here, but the rest of it's man to man. And it solves that problem of flexibility, right? Because, you know, if your fullback comes up here, then generally speaking, you're going to see the wing-back drop with them. There was a little bit of flexibility, so sometimes you might see this happening further up the field. But higher up the pitch, the idea is that you're not going to allow any of the Spurs players to have the ball. Once that happens, the only option you have is to go long. And you may think, you know, 1v1 against the back line, you kind of want that. But with Son, Werner and Johnson, you're in this situation where you're like, okay, who of those is going to win like a high ball against the centre-back and then cause any problems? So in many respects, this is solving that problem of what Spurs are trying to do in the first few phases to try and get the ball forward. If they can't do that, then they're going to go long and maybe lose the ball. And even if they do go long, this was something that was happening, is ball goes long, one of the centre-backs heads it back and Spurs win possession back. They've lost that tempo element that we were talking about at the beginning, which is they want to try and hit the space in behind, they want to try and get forward as quickly as possible. And it just changes the way that they're used to playing the game. But obviously, if they do get through this situation, then they have the other problem now, which is width in attack. This, as JJ's pointed out, this is not a good setup for your back line to be this far apart. So what they did, Newcastle, as soon as Spurs had broken the press, is they moved back into a much more defensive framework. So the 2 centre-backs came inside, and then the wing-backs now left the full-backs of Spurs and dropped in. So you've got back 5 now.
And they sort of said, come and get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so dropped into a low block like this, and now Spurs are getting blocked out in the wide area. If you're going to try and go 1v1 against the wing-back here, then you have the opportunity of the centre-back coming across and helping, or maybe the centre midfielder.
Yeah.
And then you've got the flexibility of these 2 players as well, which is nice, because Spurs are going to try and find space in between the lines, but you know that this player can go forward and cover space. Let's say Maddison's up here, we know he's a dangerous player. If he gets the ball, Kraft can step forward, and you've still got a back 4 as well. So you now have a zonal system to deal with the width. So again, Eddie Howe has looked at the way that Spurs play, the ideas of what they're trying to express on the pitch, and he said, well, we'll stop them doing this thing in their half, and then we'll stop them doing this thing in our half. And it ended up playing out and working.
I mean, that sounds pretty repeatable. Are there solutions to this? That have we seen Spurs do anything in games since?
There's not been any games since then.
Oh well, then we won't have seen any change.
Yeah, but I think the initial thought that you have as a Spurs fan is, oh, great, now everyone knows the blueprint of how to beat our team. But I do think there's things here that we can talk about that you can actually break this stuff down with. There's a few things that I see as weaknesses here. One of which is the 1v1 at the back. So you've got, like you said, Johnson versus Burn. Son versus Cher is not a scary prospect, but if you bring in a striker who suddenly becomes a really good hold-up player, this starts looking a lot less functional as an approach. So you can find ways of trying to exploit these 1v1 matchups at the back line. But the other thing is when teams are man-marking like Newcastle are doing, you can manipulate where their players are going to be, right? So Gordon is on Van der Ven. Van der Ven can move out here, and suddenly Gordon has to follow him as a general rule.
Yeah.
And what you can then start doing is start thinking of the ways that you can get upside from that, because players are always going to be reactive to that. So if Van der Ven goes, it's going to take time for Gordon to actually respond.
Yeah.
And so what you can start doing then is finding third man combinations, as we call them, where Isak is here between Bissouma and Vicario, so this is a 2v1. How do you stretch Isak into Vicario to then create space around Bissouma, where you can find him with this, what we'd call a third man combination? And again, there's other things you can do. You can pull players wide and have players dropping in to receive. You could do the opposite. You can have Porro inside, and Bissouma can pull, Isak out of the way, and they can play a bounce pass around Isak. The general principle is you can move their players around. You have the initiative in all of those moments as well. So this will be something that Spurs will have to work on as well. And then I guess the final thing is the defensive aspect as well, because I think what's nice about this setup is that Newcastle are set up really well, so that if the ball is turned over in the midfield area, they now basically have a 3v2 against the back line if they can get the ball in quick enough to it. And again, I think the screenshots that I showed you before with the rest defence looking really open, the solutions to that Postecoglou can find. He can think a little bit more pragmatically about defending in those moments, or how he might structure his team without just throwing the whole idealistic blueprint in the bin. So there's like within the actual idealism, there are tweaks that can be made to make things work for them as well.
You can see why fans would be divided, though, because that is a fairly scary prospect, and with the notion of how Postecoglou does play ideologically, it's hard to see how those changes might happen next year. But it is still very early, so who could say? JJ Bull, I suppose the next question is, what should the expectations be? Because it's unlikely, I think, that they're going to finish 4th this season. They're pretty far behind Aston Villa, and they've got a very tough run of fixtures. For anyone who doesn't know, next up, Arsenal, then Chelsea, then Liverpool, then Burnley, then Man City, and then Sheffield United.
They could win that one.
They could win that one.
Yeah.
I don't expect them to finish 4th, but where should we be expecting them to finish anyway? Because the sort of 5th.
For ages, they've been a 5th or a 4th or a 6th team. So when going right back like 15 years, even maybe not that long ago, but like Harry Redknapp was in charge, they were basically a 4th or 5th team, and they've been there for a long time. There was a small period when they were starting to get 2nds and 3rds when Mauricio Pochettino was in charge, and we can look at how they managed to do that. But it is, so to get into the Champions League, you have to get about 71 points on average. That's basically what you need. And sometimes Spurs hit that, sometimes they don't. The highest you've needed in the last 10 years to get there is 79 points, which is definitely not hitting.
No.
And something that happens when there's like a load of teams together, it seems to be that are really equally matched, which is kind of similar to what they are now. And the lowest you've needed is 66.
So it's worth saying then, like, if this season you might expect them to get over that 71 point mark, but Aston Villa being great is just a new thing, right? So they might be a little unlucky not to be in the Champions League this season.
Well, there's always like a random team that appears battling that bit as well. But if you think about what you've got now, it's set in stone. You've got Man City, Liverpool, Chelsea should be there, but they're not. But you've got Man City, Liverpool, Man United, Arsenal.
There you go.
Newcastle should be around a bit there, and they were last season. They were the random one. Aston Villa now as well, and Spurs want to be there. So you've basically got 7 or maybe 8 teams who are competing for 4 places. So it's very, very competitive. But to get to 71 points, so how do you guarantee it to 71 points minimum? You need to have a really good team, and have a really good team, you need a good manager and really good players. So that's like the secret to football. But one man who did know the secret of football was Mauricio Pochettino, who had Spurs as probably the best team in the Premier League they've ever had. They finished 3rd with 86 points, was the most they've had. And
2nd, Ruben Pinder told us yesterday.
Oh, 2nd as well.
The season after to Conte's Chelsea in 16-17, I think.
So it was a good team they put together, but a lot of it was, maybe unfair to say this, but kind of inherited. He kind of stumbled across it. If you look at what they had, this is the team. Now, Harry Kane has just come through, as a 21-year-old was scoring like 29 goals a season or something. So you instantly had, out of nowhere, an academy product that you can build a team around. We're trying to build a super club. It really helps having a superstar. You can't really buy them in your Spurs. He's come through, very useful. Wiz Dembele, incredibly underrated, one of the best midfielders of the 10-year period that Spurs were doing well. This centre-back pairing was ridiculously good. Then you also had the France captain in goal. You had the best right-back the Premier League's ever had.
Yeah.
Danny Rose was really good, but Ben Davies tended to play. Then you had Dele Alli did come along, scored loads of goals. Like him, Son, and Kane were all great players. Ericsson was at his probably his peak when he was at Spurs there as well. So this team
and
was
Eric
really
Dyer,
good.
who's the only player you didn't mention.
Yeah,
I know Eric Dyer.
He was good for a while.
Yeah, he gets a sort of. I think Eric Dyer's a little slept on. You know, like tactically speaking, he's a very adaptable player, and there's a reason that all big coaches like him, right? Whether you think he's terrific or not, you know, he's consistently there in these big teams. I mean, look at the centre-backs he's keeping out at Bayern right now.
Oh yeah, I think, yes, Eric Dyer is a fantastic player, and it's a wonder that Spurs didn't win the league with him as one of their main assets.
Well, that's a little further the other way, but no, go on.
Anyway, so that team that Pochettino had, they scored 86 goals and had 26 goals against that season, which is very, very good.
Yeah.
But the reason Chelsea, because it was better than everyone else in the league actually that year, but Chelsea won the league that year because they just won more games. Spurs kept drawing.
It was the famous 3-4-3 season as well, wasn't it? No one knew what to do. Everyone panicked.
Yes, exactly. So it was a big year for the 3-4-3. It really came into fashion. Now, the reason I'm telling you these things that you probably already know is that we're trying to look at why Spurs didn't turn into a just every single year Champions League team or a league pushing team, you know, always on the up. And it's because of, I think, recruitment. So when you're trying to build a super club, you want to build on it. Spurs didn't build because they were building a stadium, which is obviously quite a good thing to have and will help them in the modern era. But what they didn't do is really invest in the players they had. And when they did invest in 2017-18, They bought nonsense.
It was quite bad, wasn't it, when you look at it?
And they bought even more nonsense in 2019-20. I'm sure the players will be on the screen and you'll agree that Tanguy and Ndombele was not it. But then what you had was Pochettino left behind a squad that I think was quite imbalanced, had no real pace, no width. Then he got binned after the Champions League final 5 months after that. Mourinho came in and then they just didn't really go anywhere. But Pochettino came in, they peaked, they declined, they didn't build on it. And you look at what Liverpool did. Klopp came in, they started to rise, they build on it, they buy Van Dijk, they spend big money on one or two key players that takes you to the next level.
And they get those transfers right for the most part.
Absolutely. Now the good thing is that the current squad is set up to go on another upward curve. So Postecoglou, Freudian slip, has a good group of young players.
I don't know how Freudian it was, but it was a slip.
It sounds like I know what I'm talking about though. It sounds smart.
Yeah.
And that's all you really need. Confidence and words. Now, like Sarr and Udogie, really high potential young players, both 21. You've got Van de Ven, I think he's very good. Kulusevski, both 23. Then you've got Romero, is a World Cup winning centre-back. He's only 20, well, he's about to turn 26. He may have turned 26 by the time you watch this.
Yeah.
Because there's laws about how birthdays work.
He might be 50 by the time someone's watching.
If he doesn't change the day he was born before you watch this, he's 26.
Yeah.
But they have a good core group of players who have high potential, who could potentially be one of these top 4 teams.
Why have you got Ross Barkley written in massive letters on your document?
Because you'll find out.
Okay. That's something to stick around for.
But they have a really good core group of young players who could potentially be on the up, and they can start building with these 1 or 2 massive players every year. And now they have the stadium in place to have revenue, and they should be able to compete with some of the other teams. They compete in a different market.
Right.
But if they were to look for players to improve them, the best places would probably be in the wide areas at the moment, I would say.
It's funny you say that, JJ, because Alex Barker has sent a video. We didn't ask him to, but he made a video for us looking specifically at 1v1 specialists in the wide areas, which is something I think a lot of Tottenham fans have been talking about recently. So, Alex Barker, tell us your thoughts.
Since the beginning of 2024, Tottenham have scored 24 goals in 14 games, or 1.7 goals per game, which is a notable drop-off from their numbers in the first half of the season. But Ange Postecoglou may already have a good idea of where his attack is faltering and how he can improve it. When Spurs have built up against a settled defence, they've often rotated their fullback and their number 8 in a bid to disrupt the opposition's shape. This gives Spurs 2 options. Find the fullback, in this case Destiny Udogie, in behind the defence, or allow him to drag defenders away from Spurs' left winger, who is hugging the touchline. This latter option intends to set the winger up 1v1, giving them space to dribble around the defender and create chances. But none of Spurs' wingers have particularly high attacking output. Postecoglou himself has said this is an area his side are working hard to improve. The left wing specifically also appears to be an area recruitment staff are focusing on, having held talks with Club Brugge's Antonio Nusa in January before signing Timo Werner on loan. So let's look at some sensible transfers that Spurs could make to get the most out of this role in Postecoglou's tactical setup. One player who would almost certainly provide an uptick in dribble numbers is 18-year-old Désiré Doué. He's played both on the wing and through the middle for Rennes. But there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the left side is where he belongs. He ranks as one of the most productive dribblers in Europe's top 5 leagues and has a success rate higher than all but one Spurs player. And in 7 of Doué's top 8 games for dribbles completed, he's played as a touchline hugging winger. In these situations, Doué can cause a lot of problems, either by cutting inside to shoot or pass on his favoured right foot, or baiting his marker, beating them on the outside and driving to the byline. This is a particularly impressive part of his profile because while the Frenchman is fast, he tends to rely more on skill and trickery in 1v1 scenarios, shaping to go one way before very quickly moving in the opposite direction. In fact, the Athletics Liam Farm even compared him to another Rennes Academy graduate, Ousmane Dembele. Doué's other underlying numbers also show promise, and with a contract that runs out in 2 years, he could potentially be a great option for Spurs' left wing. However, Postecoglou may prefer a player whose success is a little more guaranteed than a teenager in his second season of senior football. If that's the case, Athletic Club's Nico Williams might be the player Spurs need. He's been adorned with praise for his performances under Ernesto Valverde this season, and he currently sits top of La Liga for successful dribbles per 90. Williams has also had an interesting career path to this point. Last season, he played predominantly off the right wing, contributing to 10 league goals. Yet this campaign, Williams has played almost exclusively off the left, registering fewer goals but more assists. While the 22-year-old is predominantly right-footed, he's comfortable using his left foot to shoot or cross. And that, along with his speed, makes Williams a really unpredictable player to defend against. For example, 5 of his assists this season have come from cutting inside and delivering a cross to the back post. But he's also hit 6 assists by racing to the byline before rolling the ball back into space for a teammate. The only obvious area for improvement is his shooting, but it's clear that Williams would add a huge creative boost to Postecoglou's attack. And some flexibility too, with him and Brennan Johnson able to play on either flank. Of course, all of this makes Williams a player that other clubs may target. And if Spurs miss out on Champions League football, they may not be his first choice. So let's look at one last player, Crescencio Somerville of Leeds United. Currently playing in the Championship but has Premier League experience, Somerville has accrued 8 assists from open play this season and has scored 15 non-penalty goals, all at the age of just 22. Most importantly though, Somerville fits the touchline winger profile that suits Spurs, with strong underlying creative and dribbling numbers. Another impressive aspect of his game is his spatial awareness. When the ball is on the opposite flank, Somerville looks to come across the pitch and stand in central pockets of space. So when he receives the ball, he has time to turn and run at the defence. As play shifts over to his side, Somerville gets closer and closer to the touchline. But where he is on the touchline depends on what phase of possession Leeds are in. If they're building up near their own goal, Somerville drops deeper, creating space between him and his marker. Once these start moving forward though, Somerville is very conscious on staying on the fullback's blind side, which minimises the time the defender has to react once the Dutchman receives the ball. Premier League defenders may be able to keep up with him better than those in the Championship, but these are still promising traits. And if Leeds don't get promoted, it may be easier to get Somerville on a cheaper deal too. What we do know, however, is that Spurs' left wing is a position where there's a lot of potential to create chances, yet their current players aren't taking enough advantage of that. But if they were to sign any of these options, it could be the boost that takes Postecoglou's side to the next level.
Thank you, Alex Barker. JJ Bull, I assume wide areas, not the only area that they could improve in. What do you think?
I think they could improve in lots of areas. The wide areas is the most important one, and me and John both, we like Nico Williams, have put him in sensible transfers loads of times. Then one of the things, before I tell you the other positions, that the market Spurs are competing in is not the same one as Man City or probably Liverpool. It's got to be players who are on the cusp of being really good but not quite there, and they're still going to have to pay big money, so it's a risk. Like they've done it before with Davinson Sanchez. That was a similar signing, didn't work out. Brennan Johnson might be similar. I don't know how good, well, how high his ceiling is really, but it's big money for players you can't really guarantee will be good. But I think one of the things you've seen with Postecoglou's teams, particularly Celtic, is how important the pivot role is. So Basuma is a really good player and I like him in that, but Postecoglou, the way they attack, like John was talking about, they often leave gaps you can exploit and you know what they're going to do and where the spaces will be, so you can try and attack that. If they're going forward, you want someone in that 6 role who can help defensively but also is really good with passing. Callum McGregor was amazing at Celtic. So I don't know, the profile would probably be someone, I mean ideally what you want, John, would be like Rodri, right? Would that be perfect?
Yeah, I mean I think most clubs would probably be improved by the addition of Rodri.
Because they can't afford Rodri, I was looking at some other players maybe who would suit the Postecoglou style of play, but also would give them a bit of defensive power.
Who did you come up with?
Rodri. So I look at some. So oftentimes you would look at players from the Premier League who, like the best of the rest. You know, when Liverpool signed Andy Robertson,
Sure.
Best of the rest,
Right.
Best left back. Wasn't quite there yet, but he was really good at Hull. You can see it. So like Fulham's João Palhinha would be amazing in there. Bit older though, so maybe not a stopgap. How about this one? Here's a hot take. Ross Barkley. Because he's a bit like Moussa Dembele.
He is. He is a bit older as well though, isn't he?
He's 31. Not even that old.
How old's
Spurs have the
Palhinha?
4th youngest squad in the entire league. The oldest player they have that actually plays is son, who's 31.
It's how Leverkusen did it, isn't it? They bought all 31-year-olds.
Yeah.
And then they won the league. No one said that they could do that.
Do you know Ross Barkley's a nice squad player? I don't think he's really the answer, but you buy him, bring him in, you've got cover for Basuma. He's so good in that little role at the moment.
Is he?
Yeah, he's
As
amazing.
they say in
I think,
Luton, que jugador.
yeah.
I don't know what that means.
Or you can try and pay loads of money and bring in like Çalhanoğlu from Inter or something like that, which is unrealistic because it's so much money, you know.
Right.
So this is that was my
Çalhanoğlu.
hot take. Yeah.
Yeah. I wasn't. I mean, I think I haven't. You know, I don't think I've watched Ross Barkley for about 4 years, so I don't know. I don't know how to react.
Do you see my video I made about him?
Yes. Well, there's our thoughts on transfer land. Just generally speaking, though, with Postecoglou, what does your gut tell you? I mean, both of you. What do both of your guts tell you about next season? Because I'm kind of really uncertain.
I only have one gut, but my gut is telling me that the big question with Postecoglou, whether or not he's going to step up to be the sort of elite coach that could take Spurs to greatness, is whether or not he can evolve, right? That's what we see from the best managers. Klopp arrived in England and evolved his play style. The strength of Guardiola is that he evolves every season, and we see that happening all the time. So
people make the mistake of thinking that's not the case, don't they?
No, yeah, and it very much is. So the big question for me is, can Postecoglou recognise that his ideas, do have weaknesses? There are teams coming along now who are going to start finding those weaknesses, and I always like to say that a manager gets like a year's grace or a season's grace in a league, in the Premier League anyway, and before all of the analysts start looking at everything they're doing and they say, here's a weakness, here's a weakness, here's a weakness, and you start getting not found out, but like questions asked of you. If Postecoglou can start answering those questions, can not necessarily throw the prototype in the bin, but find ways of actually responding to the problems that are being thrown at him, then I think that Spurs are in a pretty good place.
My other consideration as well, JJ, to end on is that Postecoglou was a breath of fresh air when he arrived. Whenever you see him speaking in a press conference or an interview, chuckle along, smile warmly. He seems like a lovely guy.
He speaks like a normal human being.
Like a normal human being. The British public will turn on that over time.
Yes.
And I'm curious when. I think that might happen sooner rather than later.
Well, I think the important thing is that, Spurs are doing as well as they probably should be right now. I think Postecoglou has tended to get the best out of the people he has. So if you have a good group of players, you can kind of rely on Postecoglou to get the best out of that. The people who get more out of that are the freaks, and that's like Conte and Klopp and Guardiola, the ones who can just get a little bit more out of players that maybe anyone else should be able to do. And that's the bit we don't know, if he has the X factor and that sort of thing. But if you're a Spurs fan and if you're realistic, you look at where you should probably be around about 5th, 4th if you're doing really well and things go your way. You bring in good players, you start build towards that. Everyone else is competing in the same market as you. There's no secret players you can sign anymore. It's all that sort of thing there. But then I think I've worked out what people actually want from a manager. And it maybe lasts for maybe 1 or 2 years.
Yeah.
They want to win games of football. That bit's important.
Yeah.
They want to get the players working really, really hard. Fans love that.
They must be hardworking.
If the players work really hard on the pitch and give them their all for the badge, then the fans really like that.
Yeah.
But they like their manager to be charismatic and have like attractive energy.
Yeah, they're like other fans of other teams to also like their manager.
They like that because the manager is almost representative of them on the sideline. Yeah. So they want them to be like them, show passion, or be normal, be nice.
I was watching the football the other day, and one of the commentators, I won't say which team it was, a commentator commented on how the crowd had worked really hard as well, and I thought, they put a shift in the crowd, didn't they? They did.
They should be paying the fans.
They should be paying. I mean,
they're
they're basically the 12th man. They really are.
They really are. Yeah, and then they have to pay to do all that work.
Yeah,
that's not fair. But they also need the manager to have strong moral values. And then eventually, the last point I had on my list is to play attacking football.
Right.
So everyone wants. That's the way that every club has.
There's a Venn diagram of like 6 different circles with Guardiola in the middle, and that's it.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay. Well, there we go. Looking forward to next season. Is that a good ending?
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence, and Rafa Honigstein. With the latest transfer news and insight on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football, and you can try it free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.